diversity, equity, and inclusion. For those of you that are new to Fruition IT, we're a global tech recruitment specialist covering cyber and information security, software development and engineering, cloud, DevOps, data, and everything that's related to modern technology. After discussions with some of our largest global clients and clients across many different areas, we were keen to invite our esteemed panelists to discuss everything that is related to DE&I and how they use various different strategies and processes in order to make sure that the hiring process is the best it can be within their companies. Today we've got two guests from the US and two guests from the UK. I'll let them do their own introductions, as they will do a far better job than me. Holly, if you'd like to lead, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, hi everyone, my name's Holly, and you can probably tell from my accent I'm one of the UK panellists. So I am currently head of diversity, inclusion and belonging at an organisation called Improbable, which is a tech company based in London, and they're specialist in developing metaverse technologies. And prior to that, I've worked at another tech company, Sky Betting and Gaming, and a retail business, Asda. So been in inclusion for about 8 years now.
Marcella? You're on mute.
Hi, I am Marcella Edwards Ford. I'm formerly was a part of Samsung Electronics of America, tech company. Was with the company for more than 2 years, but have been in talent acquisition for 15 years and human resources for 20 years. And so have had my hands in a little bit of everything, but have found a sweet spot for diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know, wanting to be a part of that table, having a seat at the table, and just being able to celebrate people in all walks of life. And so, yeah, HR is what I've done for the past 20 years.
Thank you. And Clive?
Hi everyone, so my name's Clive. I'm currently the head of talent acquisition at Money Supermarket Group. So we're a company that provides products to help people save money on financial products. Previously, I was at Sky Betting and Gaming, where I worked with Holly. Been in the recruitment industry for 20 plus years, so back in the days of recruitment with a fax machine. But it's not my approach when it comes to hiring. I realise that there's so many things we can do to make the whole industry better for everybody. I've seen lots of bad practice over the years, so I want to sort of correct that, but also educate the people I work with, but also try and help people externally as well to make it a more inclusive process for everybody, whether they get a job at the company where I work or they get a job with yourselves.
Thank you, Clive. And last but not least, Ben.
Last but not least, I like it. Thank you very much. My name is Ben Murley. I'm the Global Corporate Talent Acquisition Manager at Avis Budget Group. I'm based outside of Nashville, Tennessee. I've been with the organization, is approaching 2 years now, and really looking forward to this and hearing about how everybody fosters a positive team culture throughout their organizations.
Thank you very much.
Great stuff. And just quick introductions for us. My name's Kevin Harper. I'm one of the managing consultants, predominantly looking after the UK market.
And I'm Damien. I head up the cyber and information security practice globally here at Fruition.
Fantastic. So we'd love to take your questions and answers sort of later on in the session. So please do use the chat function to raise any questions, and we'll build those into the end of the session and continue the discussion that way. But we've got a couple of questions that we'd like to run through with the panel today. We'll spend a couple of minutes, five to 10 minutes on each question, get everyone's thoughts on it, and keep the discussion moving on the topic. So to get started, then maybe we could come to you on this one, Holly. Your current organisation, what inspired them to prioritise DE&I, and how has this impacted the company culture?
Yeah, so I'm going to actually throw back to Sky Betting and Gaming, where I worked with Clive, actually, because we've got quite a nice example from there. So often people teams, it comes from us when it comes to getting diversity and inclusion on the agenda of leadership teams, business strategy, etc. So at Sky Betting and Gaming, we decided to do an exercise with our executive leadership team called overheard at Sky Betting Gaming. So we went around the organisation and gathered some of the worst experiences, comments, things that people had experienced in the business, and presented that back to our leadership team through like an experiential process, so they could really hear what people were seeing, feeling, experiencing on the ground in their organisation. And that prompted quite an emotive response in our leaders, in terms of, sometimes I think when you use the words diversity and inclusion, there can be a bit of a fear factor or a bit of resistance or defensiveness, but just presenting it back as these are the experiences of the people that exist in your business was really powerful. And then from that came a drive from them, of them knocking on our door wanting to do more things and asking what the strategy was and how we're moving the dial on this based on the things that they'd heard through that experience. So I know we're going to chat a bit more about some of those specifics later on, but that was really the catalyst for our whole diversity strategy at Sky Betting and Gaming.
Fantastic. No, thanks for that, Holly. That's really interesting. So it was actually a real world practical thing that led to a realization that this needed to be prioritized, and something that was people in the business were passionate about and needed a response. So that's interesting. Marcella, in your organization, was it something similar that led to the prioritization of DE&I, or was it different?
Yeah, it was similar. You know, DE&I has been within my company for a while, but as I talked to people and, did my research as well, my company wanted to acknowledge, respect, and celebrate the differences of all of its employees. We wanted to ensure that everyone, regardless of their background or their personal characteristics, they had a seat at the table. It's very important that we're able to have those conversations, whether they're tough conversations or not, but everyone has an opportunity to speak up. So we also wanted to level the playing field, which involved fair treatment, talked about access, opportunity, and advancement for all people. So it's an understanding and being able to address the disparities in opportunities and outcomes for those different groups. How it has impacted my company culture. I would say that the DE&I team has conducted surveys of inclusions, and close to 90% of our employees reported having a feeling of belonging. And that's what we anticipated. We wanted them to be involved and felt like they belonged, no matter what their culture was, their race, or any of that. So our research just supported the premise that anytime that you have a diverse culture or inclusive workforce, you can have a positive impact on performance and also profitability.
Fantastic. No, that's really interesting there. And actually, that brings me quite nicely onto you, Clive, in terms of, people feeling that they belong in a business. That can only have good outcomes. It's a good thing for an organization. Keeping good people is always a good thing. Do you, from your experience, DE&I, is that sort of the core reason that many businesses will lead on it, that retention element, making sure people feel that they belong in an organization?
I think it's a key thing for any organization to have, but it's trying to get the people within the organization to also believe in it and want to be part of the journey, shall we say. Yeah. I think for any business, especially ours, is you think about what our product is, it's a product that appeals to everybody. So having a diverse workforce actually brings that creativity, the difference of opinions and ideas, rather than it just being one small proportion of people, the only people that impact and put work into our product. So that's one of the reasons why we've always got to, we look at census data, what the working population is, and then we actually have to, go out and actually see if we can find people that are missing potentially within some of our teams to actually help bring in those ideas.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And Ben, bringing it to yourself, in terms of the organization you work for, did you find that there was a really positive impact once DE&I became front and center of the agenda?
Absolutely. I mean, everybody thrives under an inclusive environment, right? It fosters, innovation, improved teamwork, a overall positive work environment, right? So when you're thinking about the circle of life within any successful organization, you've got inclusive and happy and positive and really just a positive workforce. You're going to end up moving into high performers. High performers, they drive revenue. So if you're an organization, don't miss out on all this revenue and driving the success in the backbone of your organization.
Brilliant, fantastic. So what I'm taking from your answers there is that DE&I, focusing and prioritizing DE&I is not just a good thing because it's the right thing to do. It actually does improve business outcomes, revenue, growth, retaining good people. So it does feel like a win-win for the people at the very top and the employees of the organization. So, okay, fantastic, great stuff.
Yeah, and obviously, if I can just ask a question. So, obviously, everybody that will be attending this will want to understand sort of specific initiatives that your organisations have implemented that have promoted that sort of diversity inclusion within the business. Holly, what is it that you've been implementing there, and obviously what sort of the initiatives that have been implemented successfully?
Yeah, I'd say one of the most impactful things that we did, Clive and I worked together on actually. So as he mentioned, in Sky Betting and Gaming, we ran a census. So that was to help us understand. Everyone kind of says, oh, we want to be more diverse, but what does that actually mean? How can we understand our biggest areas of underrepresentation? So we ran a census to understand the profile of our business and what were the areas that were least represented in terms of our local population. And as a result of that, we decided to invest in a scheme which in the UK is called Kickstart. And it was started by the UK government to help young people get into work after the COVID-19 pandemic. But Sky Betting and Gaming, we self-funded it, so we didn't take the government funding. We used what was a really successful model and took it for ourselves, basically. So we created 13 entry-level jobs for young people throughout our business in tech roles, marketing, creative people. And because we weren't requiring any skills, experience, just passion, potential to help grow our future talent pipelines of diversity and different people from different groups. So we decided, rather than advertise in the traditional ways, LinkedIn, careers site, which bring us the same types of people who have access to those networks. We decided to hit the streets and get out in the community. So we based our head office is in a place called Leeds in the UK. So we took our people team out on tour and went to some of the most deprived areas of the city, which tend to have a higher proportion of certain ethnic minority groups. And we just interacted with people who would have maybe never have heard of our organisation, but were self-taught coders or created YouTube and music videos in their bedroom and had all the skills that we were looking for, but wouldn't necessarily have made that connection to apply for a job. And the representation was brilliant in terms of the final people that we hired. And I think what was great is originally our leadership team maybe saw it a little bit as a CSR giving back opportunity, but actually what it turned into was we found some really great talent that could add a lot of value to our business. And we filled some quite niche roles in UX, for example. So we actually used the scheme that ripped everything up, started completely from scratch with our own new ideas, and created something which actually added a lot of value to the business.
That's brilliant. And the fact that you mentioned the Kickstart sort of government scheme, and obviously after COVID, the pandemic that affected obviously everybody worldwide, trying to get into obviously the communities and, go after the underrepresented within the various different parts of your business. Marcella, with regards to obviously Samsung and obviously the previous companies you worked for, from a US government sort of side, was there anything similar to the Kickstart scheme that we had here? Is there anything that yourself and your team sort of implemented going out into the community, or what was the sort of the initiatives that you implemented that were successful that might be similar?
Right. So yeah, definitely similar in regards to one of the initiatives that we had at Samsung is we created employee resource groups, ERGs. A lot of people know about ERGs. And so we believe at Samsung that we a culture that respects diversity, equity, and inclusion is essential to continued innovation. We're a tech company, so we're oftentimes ahead of the game. We're like, you know, several months in various stages of projects that we're inventing. So our employee resource groups bring people together to exchange ideas and opinions. And as a result, we can learn from those things. We can learn and appreciate each other's differences and also turn them into valuable resources. So at Samsung, we have various ERGs. They're based on gender. They're based on LGBTQ. I think I have the letters there. Race, working parents, veterans in different regions, and also, you know, including Europe, Latin America, and also Southwest Asia. So those are just some of the initiatives. We also have like our DE&I Council. We have a DE&I Week, and also STEM, which is a girls' project, which we'll solve for tomorrow.
That's brilliant. The fact that you obviously created the council within the organisation, obviously the various different ERG groups, which obviously makes everybody feel welcome, and I suppose they've got an area or a group of individuals similar to them that can discuss various different things that are happening within the workplace. Then obviously that brings everybody together. Just to yourself, Clive, obviously I know you've got similar examples to Holly, what she mentioned with Sky Betting and Gaming, but obviously with moneysupermarket.com, obviously such a big brand in the UK and a big organisation. What is it that you've been implementing there that sort of had a successful outcome and sort of strategy, Clive?
I'll talk more from a TA perspective, because the people team have been doing lots of things on the strategy and initiatives, but in my own area, my own team's area, we've got inclusive hiring as a key pillar of work. Our project, shall we say. We'll never actually get to the end of this project. We'll never complete it. Nobody will. And we're evolving and learning over time. But some of the things that our team have done this year is we've improved our sourcing techniques. So we've worked with two worldwide sourcing experts to give us new techniques to find candidates that we often say don't exist in the funnel. So that's been really useful. We've adopted inclusive adverts. We've changed our approach to salary questioning. So we no longer ask what your current salary is, because obviously that can affect the gender pay gap and just perpetuates a lot of these problems. But these were some things that the business in the past were a little bit reluctant to change because they'd always done it like that. We've done some training on reasonable adjustments. We've designed interview questions in advance that we give to candidates, which is a relatively new approach, but I foresee that within probably the next 10 years, it'll be quite common practice in the industry. And then we've got a thing called the interview passport, where we send out details to a candidate and they can actually pick and choose how they'd like to be interviewed, which is quite a new concept, but we're getting some really positive feedback from candidates and stakeholders to be more inclusive, but also prepared to be at their best for the interview. Other things that we've got lined up really is just learning more about the topics and actually just challenging ourselves and challenging our stakeholders as well, because quite often we find in TAs, we work with some hiring managers that constantly hire, and over time, each time you hire, you can make small improvements, and they're the best people to work with. But sometimes you come across a hiring manager that they've not hired with us for maybe years, and they think they know what best practice is. So it's sometimes educating them, and seeing what we can do to make a difference.
That's brilliant. Obviously, from a TA perspective, like you said, the different types of interviews, how people want to be interviewed, whether it's face-to-face or a video call, having that sort of flexibility there. And like you said, obviously making sure that hiring managers are aware of what's being done.
One thing that I had a conversation with today, I just forgot, we're actually looking at our interview rooms. So how do we make our rooms more inclusive? So actually people that come in can actually perform at their best.
Wow, that's interesting. And I suppose, Ben, from a from a TA perspective and leading that TA function from the US side, just touching on what Clive said regarding not asking about applicants' current packages. I know obviously from the recruitment that I do in the US, it's kind of frowned upon to ask people what their current package is. Obviously, we don't do that. And I suppose that's something that in the UK is slowly being introduced, like Clive said. But from a TA perspective, you know, what is it that Avis have been implementing and you've been implementing, I suppose, not just US, but globally, that's seen a success within DE&I hiring?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's certainly, you know, a little bit more different, you know, from the US versus other global hiring is what you might sell and how you might ask and propose certain questions. You know, really what we can do, especially from a US perspective, is sell what we have to offer. The you know, talk on all of these topics that everybody's been sharing. You know, of course, we've also been implemented ERGs, you know, trainings and unconscious bias trainings for employees. Implementing, you know, I love what Clive had to share. You know, diverse interview panels, changing the way from a TA perspective, the way that we hire. Setting diversity goals for your team and implementing KPIs in that way. You know, also another really cool thing that we've done from a training perspective is implementing mentorship programs. You know, not only does it help from just an overall support of their career growth, but also just kind of helps foster that sense of belonging within the organization as you get started with somewhere new.
Okay, brilliant. Ben, just sticking with you then, Ben, that brings us nicely on to our next question, because you mentioned there sort of a key word that made my ears prick up was KPIs and the measurement. And that was really the next question that we had around, you know, so you've got these fantastic D&I initiatives, you've gone out into the business, you've maybe gone out into the communities, you've put them in place, you feel that they're working, but how do you know that they actually are working? So what have you tried to do in your organization to actually measure whether these initiatives have been a success, and how generally do you track the success of those things?
Yeah, that's what they say, right? The KPIs, they help measure that success, and it helps really be able to kind of create a story into how, you know, it puts things in perspective. It shows you if you're doing the right thing or not. And then if you are, you can kind of continue to work and enhance on improving. And if you're not, then you definitely need to make some changes around, you know, what you need to do in order to improve. So, you know, we track demographic data across our organization. We have employee satisfaction and engagement surveys. We even go up all the way to the leadership level of monitoring underrepresented groups. From a hiring perspective, we also analyze that hiring data to help ensure that from a talent acquisition standpoint, our processes are also equitable, right? You know, a huge initiative just kind of specifically for our group and a big focus for us last year and ongoing was women in technology, for example. You know, really focusing in on women in tech. And, you know, there was a study by Deloitte that when you look at other large global tech firms, when you're looking at the you know, men to women ratio, it's generally about 33% female. And that's about the average, right? At least that was from 2022, what they had pulled. And since this was such a focus for us, we knew that this was something that we wanted to improve on, or at least look at. Are we doing this right? Or, you know, are we doing a good job? Are we not doing a good job? So we tracked all of our external hiring globally for 2022. And for the US, I pulled up some numbers here. We were sitting at 36.4% female. Globally, we were sitting at 34.5%. Right? So right above average, which, you know, hey, it's something to celebrate, you know, just above average, but we want to get way above average, right?
Yeah.
You know, how do we get to 50%? What can we implement? What can we change? You know, this gave us some backing in order, you know, because of this data and because we were tracking the KPIs, this gave us kind of a return on investment into some new, you know, technologies that we're using. For example, we were able to invest in a technology that actually analyzes the language that you use in your job descriptions.
Yeah.
Taking and the idea behind it is completely eliminate your bias in your job descriptions.
Yeah.
So, you know, I might think, if we're trying to, at least before we started using this tool, my thought was, okay, well, if we want to increase our female applicants, maybe we should target, a feminine job description and feminine language. But really what the research shows is that you want to completely eliminate bias altogether, because it's actually going to detract people if it shows one way or the other. So that's just one example, but love to hear about some of the other ways that some of these other folks use.
Yeah, definitely. And we ran a similar session to the one we're on now in the UK last week. And one of the really interesting points that came up there was actually if you can get under the skin of the simple things. So if you take a recruitment team making outreaches to the market, there's actually great tools that you can get now that look at the response rate from people's outreach based on gender. And they've actually found one client that one of these companies worked with who actually found that one of the female recruiters was getting a much higher response from female applicants, and it was as simple as looking at how she had structured the language and the tone of her outreach emails, and it was a really quick fix just to roll out that across the rest of the team to increase that female inclusion. So like you say, even small data points can actually make a massive difference to key areas. Clive, coming to you, I really like something else that was raised last week was inclusion points, where you can measure data at certain points, either throughout the hiring process or subsequent process. So, for example, you can track it all the way to board level, where, for example, are female professionals dropping out before they hit board level? What are the reasons for that? Or are people from certain ethnic backgrounds dropping out before they reach a certain level? Have you seen that done particularly successfully in the organisations you've worked for?
I'll go back to Skype and gaming days. One of the things that myself and Holly realised was we had to actually reset the data because some of our data that we got was either incorrect or it wasn't pulling through on the correct fields. So I think that's a key thing for any team to do, is look at that first. And then also it's getting colleagues to feel comfortable with that self-declaration, because sometimes people are a little bit skeptical of why you need that information and what you're going to do with it. So it's making sure people are clear with that. And my current role, we are really quite fortunate with some of the data that we can get. Most people opt in; they don't see a problem actually declaring things. But then the good thing is, in that show, when it goes to the hiring process, with that funnel, we can see anonymized data of where people drop out. So then we're looking at what's the reason why we're losing female candidates for this specific role, or people from a multi-ethnic background. And then we can look at, is there a bias with the hiring team? Is it something wrong with the advert, or is it actually something when it comes to the recruiters' behaviors as well? So we found that quite useful. It's something we need to probably do more on. And then other things that we do is obviously we report on the gender pay gap, but we're also reporting on the ethnicity pay gap reporting, which we actually don't have to do as an organisation. But we want to actually try and lead the field and actually, present data on that as well.
Okay. Fantastic. And Marcella, coming to you, obviously, a company the size of Samsung, you could generate huge amounts of data across your global business. So how does an organisation of that size, and there will be people joining us on the session today who are working for large organisations, what's your view on how you can best analyse that data when you are dealing with such a large data set?
Okay. With such a large data set and looking at the KPIs, we track attrition, whether that's voluntary or involuntary, to see if it's common among those majority group employees, or is it among the underrepresented represented group employees. We also track performance. We're looking for equal distribution of high and low ratings across those groups. Performance ratings can be a leading indicator of promotion outcomes. And then promotions, of course, we track those as well. Leadership guidelines, we track employment guidelines, and also pay equity.
Fantastic. And finally, just on this question, Holly, obviously Improbable, as you and I talked about when we met the other week, very cutting edge business in terms of the tech that they deal with. It's really a leading player in its field. So how important does the organization hold that data, and is it something that does get analyzed, and what actions come off the back of that analysis?
Yeah, definitely. That's the language that we have to speak to our leaders in. If you don't have a data point, they're not interested. So,
Right. The techies, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, similar to what everyone else says, I kind of like to present data across breaking down diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, diversity is like, what are our representation stats at different levels throughout the business? Equity is around what Marcella was talking about, like how do we look in terms of distribution of critical talent across male and female, or how many promotions were awarded across different ethnic groups, and what proportion of the pay increase budget went to different demographics, as well as all the hiring metrics that Clive talked about. And then inclusion is obviously some of the stuff that Ben was talking about in terms of like that sense of belonging, that feeling that comes through our engagement surveys. So we use Peakon and we overlay all of our demographic metrics into Peakon, so we can see how engaged are males versus females, or Black people versus the Asian community. And I think that's, for me, going into Improbable, it was a brand new role. I had to start with looking at that data holistically together, because there's so much to go after in this work. So you have to really use that to understand where are the biggest problems and where do I need to put most of my energy, because I think that's sometimes where we go wrong in this industry. We go after so much and it touches absolutely everything. So me being able to say to our exec team, I've looked across all of the data points and equity is our biggest area of focus. That's where I need your investment. That's what proves the most impactful I've found.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think that really came out of the conversation last week as well, Holly, didn't it? That if you're going to go to your senior stakeholders, it's not enough just to go and say, the feeling in the business is we need to do this, or I feel that maybe we need to do this. That needs to be backed up. As important as it is, that needs to be backed up with some data that can actually be analysed, and then commercial decisions can be made off the back of that.
Yeah, and just what Kev's saying there regarding sort of senior leadership and their involvement. So kind of brings us into the next question, really. And I know we've touched on sort of ERGs already. I know a few of you have already mentioned that, but regarding obviously the businesses that you've worked in and do work in, and obviously the employee engagement and participation sort of in DE&I programs, how do your businesses sort of encourage employee participation and engagement? And are you sort of trying to drive that from a board level? Is it something that the board are actively involved in and trying to sort of, drive that downwards, if you like, obviously making sure that it is being bought into by everybody in the organisation, the senior leadership team, the heads of department and managers, and obviously the team there. So, Clive, what's sort of your understanding and sort of how do you drive that participation and engagement?
Yeah, really great question. Really great question. We have exec member sponsorship for our ERGs. And then also we have budget as well, which helps, because sometimes when you want to put on activities, obviously these things cost. So, it is good. It's not really like a group of people meeting and then we want to try and activate something, and then it's like we're going to have to do it free. So that does help. Then from a talent acquisition angle, it obviously forms part of that journey to try and get people into our funnel, shall we say. So we talk about when we approach candidates, it's on our career site. So there's a clear messaging. But then actually when we've hired that candidate, we're often talking about it through our onboarding process. So we use a tool called Emborder. So it's part of one of the workflows on Emborder, where we mention about our ERG groups. And then as you come into the business, there's some like face-to-face onboarding. And then we actually talk about it in more detail. And some people from some of the ERGs come and talk about it. And then it's up to people if they want to join and become part of it. And then sometimes we have like a town hall, and we might have someone from a particular ERG group that's talking on one of our town hall or floor briefs from time to time. And then we do various lunch and learn activities as well to try and get people interested in what we're working on.
Fantastic. And what about yourself, Ben? What obviously I know you've touched on ERGs as well. What is it that you've been actively trying to get everybody within ABIS globally involved in DE&I and sort of gaining that participation there?
Yeah, it's the success of your DE&I programs are obviously dependent on your employee participation. Right? That's where it all starts and begins. So, one, just actually starting with open communication, kind of like Clive shared, use it as a selling point. Right? You say that you have a really positive work environment. What are one of the selling points, and what are one of the reasons why you should join this organization? Come check out our ERGs and things that we've been part of. They've been able to do X, Y, and Z events, and have been able to make a real impact on the communities. So making just through open communication and making it really visible, but also highly accessible too. Creating a platform that is easy for employees to navigate, and also initiate what's important to them, share their feedback. What do they want to talk about? And making it a very collaborative platform where you can engage on what's important to you.
And just going back on what Clive said regarding the sort of exec membership funding and sponsorship, and making sure that that's sort of a focal point. Is that something that you've seen from the Avis sort of senior leadership team? Have they
absolutely
absolutely
all the way from the executive team, making it visible and highly known, and having executive representation as well for each of the ERG.
Yeah, fantastic. And sort of Holly, regarding obviously what you've been doing, have you found that making sure that ERGs are constantly involved through hiring processes, and when staff have been onboarded, so they're aware of the different groups and who they can sort of reach out to? Is that something that you've found successful and implemented?
Yes, however, in my experience, they have to be very well managed, because you give people in the business budget and a kind of feedback loop into the executive team, and it can be chaos. So I think they have to have a clear purpose, clear boundaries, clear scope of work, because sometimes we've had examples of an ERG trying to create a policy, or we had one example of them wanting, in one organisation, I won't name it, started knocking down walls to make a wellbeing room without planning permission from the property team. So it really can go a bit wild. So I think well managed and with the right support, absolutely. I found them most useful as kind of a feedback loop. So for example, if Clive and I at Skybet were testing a particular recruitment method, we'd put it out to the people that were from the communities that we're trying to get to. And I think they're a great insight for new ideas and getting that feedback on the ground, but definitely within some nicely defined parameters.
It wasn't you, was it, Holly? I can see you with the sledgehammer taking those walls down.
I will say no more.
And what about yourself, Marcella? Again, I know we keep sort of touching on Samsung and the size of the Samsung organization, which obviously shouldn't reflect too badly, but obviously, it is such a big company, and trying to create so much resource and funding and sponsorship from so many different layers of leadership. How did you find it there? Was it something that was, easily available, made available for you? Was it something that they actively, sponsored and promoted and gave, obviously, not just yourself, but the wider talent team, that ability to go out and do what you needed to do? Yeah,
absolutely. The leadership team takes it very seriously. We love the employee participation, and we talked, like I believe Clive mentioned it, the lunch and learns. We do a lot of the town hall meetings where we have that employee participation and engagement in our DE&I programs. And so we believe that an engaged employee is going to have a positive attitude while they're working and while they're talking about the company outside of work. So, that's just one of the things that we hope to help improve the company culture. So these employees, again, with a positive attitude, they also motivate the people around them, either directly or indirectly.
Fantastic. So I guess a key theme coming out of that is it can't just be talk, it actually has to result in actions. I know say versus do is a big part of this, and it's very easy to talk DE&I, but actually actions are far harder to implement, and it does need to be driven from the top down, really, in terms of providing that funding, as Clive said, providing the initiatives and the budget to make it happen. Moving on to our next question, and Marcel, maybe we could start with yourself on this one. How do organisations stay agile in this space? Because it feels to me that DE&I is rapidly developing. There's new areas of diversity that come up all the time. So neurodiversity being an area that's being talked about more and more. How do organisations stay agile in this space and make sure that they're always one step ahead of that next wave of talent that might just need to be welcomed into a business where they haven't been previously?
Right. Now, this could be a broad topic, and I probably could go on and on all day about it, but just a high-level overview, I would say one of the things you could do to stay agile is change the way that we recruit and also vet candidates, okay? Second thing I would want to say is maybe educate your leaders, get the buy-in from the top, from all of our leaders so that we can have that change take effect. Thirdly, I would say create an inclusive workplace. We've been talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but really creating that inclusive workplace for where people are engaged and people are active in whatever topic or whatever situation that they want to be in. And then acknowledge the employees at that point, acknowledge and celebrate them, their differences, whatever group that we're, wanting to move toward, make sure that we're acknowledging and celebrating those employee differences. And then I said, lastly, create a workplace where everyone's voice is heard and they're valued.
That's interesting. So just to sort of summarize, Marcella, the impression I'm getting there from your answer is that it's almost the wrong way to look at it. If you think of, you're always trying to look at which group next needs to be included and almost looking at it in an intersectional way. Actually, if you've just made a universally inclusive space and universally inclusive organization, you shouldn't always have to be trying to chase the areas that maybe you feel you're missing.
Right, yeah. Because people will feel open enough to come to or mention those types of groups that they would like to see in the workplace as well.
Yeah. Holly, would you agree with that? Is it not necessarily a case of always trying to work out, maybe where you're going wrong and actually promote what you're doing right as an organization?
Yeah, and I think that point that you made on if you focus on creating inclusivity, it benefits everyone. I remember we did quite a lot of work around neurodiversity and looking at what changes we needed to make in the physical office environment and our ways of working. So one of the things was around sending out a meeting agenda ahead of time, having clear guidance around how the meeting's going to run, giving different options of how you can contribute to the meeting, so it doesn't just have to be verbal, and all of these kind of small types of things, but for people who think and communicate in different ways, it can have quite a big impact. And then actually when we started to roll that stuff out, we really saw that that wasn't just beneficial for that demographic, that's actually quite helpful for everybody, and actually probably the right way that we should be running meetings. I'm sure we've all sat in meetings that have been dreadful. So yeah, I think that way of looking at things, that shift in mindset of, we're not doing this one thing for this particular group, actually changing the way that we think about it can help everybody, and then it reduces the stigma of certain groups needing to access certain things as well. Okay,
fascinating. So if you get your standards and policies right, that should create a fairly universally inclusive environment. Ben, coming to you.
I would also add, I'm sorry, Damien. Once you have done all those things, go back and take a look at your anti-discrimination policies, review those things again to make sure that you're not discriminating anyone or any policy as well.
Fantastic. And Ben, coming to you, obviously we know that that DE&I can be quite a politicized subject. It's a societal, cultural subject as much as it is an organizational business subject. So do you find that from the organizations you've worked with and your network, is Is DE&I often driven by external factors in your experience?
There's constantly going to be evolving societal norms and expectations.
Yeah.
And especially a sensitive topic like this. But really just to emphasize what these two gals have shared is you constantly need to reassess your initiatives, adjust policies when needed. You use these norms and expectations and feedback that you're getting from your teams to help make the right decisions. And when you're doing the right thing, you're following the right policies, the results are all going to come.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I take it you'd agree, Marcello, as long as you're constantly updating your policies and you're very aware of them, that's a great thing to do, staying on top of that.
Absolutely, 100%.
Fantastic. But Clive, in terms of Money Supermarket, and do you find that when you joined the business, were they quite far down the journey, or have you your involvement, have you seen that take them on a much more of a journey over the last couple of months and year?
I think they're quite far down on the journey, but they're always looking to improve our ways of working, our policies, our practices. And I think what we've got to realize is we want to aspire to be one of the best places to work, but everybody else aspires to be one of the best places to work.
Yeah.
What I've noticed in my career is it's a completely different world, and employers are completely different how they work and how they behave and they treat people to when I first started. And I think we've got to constantly look to make those small improvements. I think there's some really big things that some companies can do that we would be like when we did that years ago.
Yes.
And some people still have quite old-fashioned approaches that most of us on this call probably wouldn't accept and we would challenge.
Yeah.
But for lots of other companies, it's like some of the work we'll do won't appear that big, but actually it does have a big impact for certain people as well. So it's just constantly working on it. And I'd say for anyone who's just, there's sometimes the small improvements, a little bit like Holly mentioned with the agenda in a meeting, can have so much big impact for everybody.
That's interesting. And do you find that sort of in the organisations that you've worked with, I think people on the webinar will be really keen to have an action they can take away. So what would you advise for an organisation if they felt they needed to get more of their finger on the pulse around DE&I? What can they do to stay closer to developments in that space? I put you on the spot there. Sorry.
Yeah. I'd say the first thing is if there are ERGs where they work, see if they can become a member of them, or participate in those events. Depending on people's appetite, I always like reading books. I'm not going to say I'm the best reader or fastest reader, but I've read some really great things that people have put out, and they've helped me and created ideas or thoughts that have led to other things. There's some people as well that work for organisations that will provide external training, or even attending events like this. Or even going on to Eventbrite, Meetup, typing in diversity and inclusion. See what comes up. If you can spare, an hour a week, half an hour a week, just putting some extra learning in, it's gonna, help you.
Yeah. So just finally on that then, Holly, coming to you. It feels to me then like the best way to approach this for most organisations is to get everybody involved, make it a company-wide initiative, but with your champions mixed in, the ones that are going out, understanding what the sort of key initiatives are, like Clive said, the ones that are digesting the information in the wider market. Is that the sweet spot for organisations, do you think?
So, I mean, I'm in my current role, I'm working with our head of L&D to look at our manager expectations, and we're making sure this is embedded in terms, like inclusive leadership is just part of being a good manager. It's not an extra icing on the cake anymore, like it's just how you have to be. So I think making that clear accountability is massive, and as well with executive teams. So for example, at Skybet, we removed the concept of having one exec sponsor. We said, this is just, if you're a leader in this business, this should be a priority for you. So I think definitely like making people understand, how does this relate to your role? So working with our marketing director to say, how do you apply this to the adverts that we create, or the way that you hire, so from a product and people perspective. But then you'll always have your passion fueled, galvanizing people, influential people that can help move this forward. And I think we absolutely need them, but we can't solely rely on them, because they're not always the people in positions of power with the right expertise and skill that we need to move this work on. So I think it has to be a combination of both.
Fantastic. No, that's a really good summary. Thank you, Holly.
Yeah, and then sort of the last question from us before we sort of open everything up. I'm sure everyone wants to understand, sort of real world examples, specific assignments that have resulted in successful hiring. What you've been through in sort of your careers, really. So obviously, if we just jump to you first, Clive, have you got any sort of, I know we've been sharing examples of other areas, but is there anything that you can sort of share and touch on that have been specific and resulted in success for you?
I'll talk about two quick wins, of ones that I want to celebrate my own success with, our team's success this year. So interview questions in advance, we rolled out in January, so it was a relatively new concept. So we're still early days with it, trying to get hiring managers to buy into it. There was one particular hiring manager I happened to meet face to face, told them about it. We haven't actually have a hiring manager guide that we send them. The manager was still so skeptical, was like, I'm not really buying into it, Clive. I think people could potentially cheat. I said, well, there's a little bit of compromise. Why don't we just do a couple of questions in advance? So they agreed to that. We did the hiring process, came out there and we hired the candidate, and the hiring manager came back and said, what did I know about recruitment? It was the best thing we ever did. We had such great conversations. We've hired a really great person. And then the actual hiring manager commented it on LinkedIn as well, how it had challenged and changed their perspective as well. So that was a really great win. And then the other great win for us was we did a sourcing workshop at the start of the year, which I briefly mentioned about, where we learned new techniques. And in the workshop that we were working on, we came across an organisation called We Are Black Journals. Part of the Money Supermarket group, we actually have the money saving experts, or the Martin Lewis brand, the journalism arm, shall we say. And what we did find out from some City of London university studies, that 94% of journalists in the UK are white. So we put together an internship program where we wanted to find candidates from a multi-ethnic background. We partnered with an organisation, an enterprise charity called We Are Black Journals. We put an event. We got Martin Lewis to come and speak to the aspiring journalists. 20 young people came in that were wanting their first break into journalism. We've hired 2 people that came to the event, and then we've got a third candidate that we've got for our future talent pipeline. And then it's the start of the partnership with them. And we're going to do another event later in the year. And then the other thing from a giving back perspective is, when the organisation goes out to other companies, that work in that journalism space, they can say they work with us, they can say that Martin Lewis came and spoke at the event, and then it opens more doors for them as well, and then hopefully gets more people the opportunity to get into journalism that are, from a non-white background as well.
That's amazing. I think obviously getting someone from a high profile person like Martin Lewis to obviously drive it for you, and then obviously bring in the different community groups to drive that inclusivity hiring. Also, I like what you touched on there, which was similar to what Holly had mentioned previously regarding the interview questions in advance. Obviously looking at people, neurodiversity, that like to plan ahead and make sure that there's no surprises there. We've asked questions similar to other hiring managers that we deal with about sort of potential questions up front. We've had pushback in certain areas, like you did, but obviously it shows that it can work. And I do think that when we come to the interview process, especially from an agency background like myself and Kev, it's good to be able to speak to clients and advise and say this is what certain other companies are doing. It might be something that could obviously improve sort of your hiring processes, whether that be through agency or direct. Regarding yourself, Marcella, obviously, what sort of the specific successes that you've sort of had?
I think one of the successes that we had was doing one of our rollouts of a new product. So we have this big event 4 times a year in Plano, Texas, as we're rolling out new products into the market. we're also talking to a lot of people all the time. So we decided one year to just have like a career fair during the same time with the product rollout. And we at the time were looking for 10 product managers. And we were able to hire at least 5 product managers from that rollout. Even though we were introducing a new product to the market, we just had such a huge turnout of people of a diverse backgrounds that were able to show up for this event, that we ended up hiring at half of the people that we needed from that event. And so that was huge for us because, oftentimes when we're meeting with hiring managers, we have to put together a recruiting strategy. We talk about marketing analysis and things of that nature. And so even though we didn't have to do this in that regards, we were still able to hire half of the people that we needed. And that's so far ahead of the game because once we start out with one project, we may roll out a product, but we're already into our next project. We're 3-4 months already into the next new thing.
Yeah, I really like that, Marcella, because we often talk to our clients about having a hiring culture, so that people realize the problem most companies get into is they only think about hiring when they actually need to hire. And you're right, why not piggyback off a product launch that's going to get your customers in, the people that are most likely to be your best in potential employees. It's about having that hiring culture so that you're always alive to where your next best talent could come from and not just waiting until we've got a vacancy that we need to fill. So that naturally increases DE&I, I think, because everybody in the business is looking for that next best talent.
Yeah, and what about yourself, Holly? Obviously, I know, again, similar to what Clive's done, but it sounds like from what Marcella and Clive have said is that, rather than just advertising a role, seeing what applicants come in and then checking the diversity of those applicants, actually going out physically and being in the community, whether it be a careers fair, whether it be getting in specialists that can drive that. It sounds like that face-to-face, brand awareness of an organization and driving that sort of face-to-face community spirit and diverse culture. Is that something that you've seen as well be successful?
Yeah, for sure. I think if you look into like a deeper perspective on some of the systemic reasons why we don't see representation of certain groups, so like certain ethnic minority communities or socioeconomic demographics, they may not have any access to a network where they've seen someone in a role like your company does, so that the connection may just not be there to understand, to put themselves forward for a role or understand what your company does. So I think going out to communities and breaking things down and helping them understand what happens behind the name of a brand or what your brand actually is massive. And I think we need to get more comfortable with moving towards positive action. So looking at where we do have underrepresentation or need to engage more with particular communities, like it is okay to do targeted action to get to those communities, to level that playing field. And I know through the training that Clive was talking about, the sourcing training, there was something really clever where they were taught to look for certain last names which represented Black or Asian communities, and then as a result of that, our next round of our grad scheme, because the team had done some direct sourcing for that based on those techniques, it completely transformed the type of people that came through, and they were all brilliant. I think I always like to get the point across that diversity of talent is not a compromise. We're casting the net wider for the same standard of people, and that's what that did.
Yeah, I like that, the fact that, like you said, obviously trying to get underrepresented people that might not have access to, understanding what the business does. And sometimes, the recruitment process, it can be quite a faceless journey for a lot of people. They don't know, exactly what a company stands for on the culture side. And I think that's something that as an agency we can do better when working with clients, and also from a client perspective, from an internal perspective, making sure it is front and centre when it comes to the process. Ben, obviously, I know we're pressed for time, but obviously just sort of a parting shot with yourself, really, just on any quick success that you've had.
Yeah, absolutely. We're approaching, so I'll be quick. You know, a big focal point for us has been collaborating with local community organizations to help us identify underrepresented talent and throughout the communities. I mean, there's tons and tons, just an absolute plethora of great, exceptional organizations, both globally and targeted throughout your local communities, that can help you do this and identify this. And it's you know, one of the reasons for such a focal point for us is, you know, not only does it add to the diversity and just the overall value to your team, but you know, obviously we're all, especially from a TA perspective, I'm trying to result successful hires, but it strengthens your community, your relationships within your community, and is also going to help improve the overall representation and reputation of your company and your organization as being an inclusive employer.
Fantastic, that's brilliant. Well, I mean, obviously, just to wrap this up, I think me and Kevin obviously could take a lot away from this, but I think it's quite obvious that a diverse, you know, business and an inclusive business is clearly more profitable. It creates a better organisation, a better culture, and ultimately that's better for shareholders and stakeholders, and I'm sure they'll be happy with the revenue. But also, I think another key take home is that you know, we need to be driving and be front and center when it comes to making sure that the culture of an organization is people are aware of exactly what the company stands for, and getting that senior leadership buy-in and making sure they're driving it forward is a way that everybody can really get involved. So yeah.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, we've obviously got sort of take a couple of questions. I believe there's a Q&A function that if you've got any questions, please do type it in. We've had one here come through, which I'll put to the panel just around, is there any initiatives that you've tried that haven't got off the ground? We've talked about successes today, but does anyone have any examples of things that maybe didn't gain any traction at all?
I can kick off. I've already mentioned the ERGs that fell flat, I think, or lost engagement because they weren't managed correctly. So I think my key learning from that, which applies to a lot of this work, is always with, I think, DE&I, you can often slip in, oh, it's just looks like a nice thing to do, but if you don't have a clear link back to your strategy, a clear outcome, a clear goal of what you're doing it for, I think that's where things can not get the traction and engagement that you're looking for.
Yeah, so not just initiatives for the sake of doing them, Holly, it's got to tie back into your overall strategy.
Exactly, yeah.
Anyone else got an example of something that you tried that didn't quite take off? It's good if you don't, that's a good thing. No worries. Yeah. Okay, fine. And then just finally, another question just on sort of engagement at senior stakeholder level. Maybe coming to the guys in the US, because obviously you both work for bigger organizations. Is there any practical tips you can give to make DE&I even more visible at board level, or is that even necessary? Is it already very visible at board level? How do you drive that upwards?
Yeah, the messaging to us is always being driven, right? And I think it not only can it be funneled up from the down up, but also from the top down, right? From your board, from the leadership, and from executive level.
Fantastic. Marcel, would you agree with that? Is it a case that you shouldn't always, doesn't need to be pushed up? Is this now very visible at board level?
It's very visible for us at board level. And you know, we get that buy-in from the very beginning. We get that buy-in, we push that downward as well to make sure that if change management needs to happen, people understand those things. So you know, as I believe like Ben just said, you know, we drive that very hard from the very beginning.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, great stuff. Well, all that remains to be done is to say thank you ever so much to our panelists today. You've all been fantastic. Thanks for sharing both sides of experience from both sides of the Atlantic. That's been really good, and hopefully everyone who's attended today has taken something away. We always follow up with a questionnaire. We'd love to get your feedback and your thoughts on what could be improved and what topics you'd like to hear about for future events. We want that to be driven by people who regularly view these events, because it shouldn't, you know, we want to know what you want to hear about so we can put together a forum on that basis. Anything you'd finish with?
No, just again, thank you for obviously your participation. Very much appreciated. And yeah, we'll be back in touch soon.
Thanks, guys.